He didn't knock. The door of Rosie's diner flew open so hard it cracked the frame, and Vincent Crowe walked in like he owned every inch of ground his shoes touched. He was wearing a tailored coat that cost more than Nora's rent for 6 months, and his eyes swept across the nearly empty diner the way a man surveys property he's about to demolish. He spotted her behind the counter, still in her apron, hair half fallen out of its clip, a dish rag in her hand, and he smiled. That smile made her stomach drop. "You're Catherine Ellery's daughter," he said. Not a question. Nora didn't answer. Her fingers tightened around the dish rag. Vincent moved toward the counter slowly, deliberately, the way a man moves when he has already decided how something ends. He reached into his coat and placed a single photograph on the counter between them. It was a picture of Nora leaving her apartment building that morning. Timestamp, 7:42 a.m. "I need something your mother took from me," he said. "You have 72 hours to find it and hand it over." After that, he picked up the photo, tucked it back into his coat, and shrugged with something obscenely close to regret. "I stopped being polite." He turned and walked out, left the door hanging open, left Nora standing there with a dish rag in her hand and a cold that had nothing to do with the rain coming in through the broken frame. Her mother had been dead for 4 months. Whatever Catherine Ellery had taken, Nora didn't know what it was, but she was starting to understand why her mother had spent the last years of her life afraid of her own shadow. If you've ever been handed someone else's war and told to fight it alone, this story is for you. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. And drop a comment right now telling me the city or country where you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to the night everything changed for Nora Ellery. Part 1. The diner closed at 10. It was 10:47 by the time Nora finished mopping the back section near the booths, and her feet were past the point of hurting. They had gone numb somewhere around the 3rd hour of her double shift. She was 29 years old, and she moved like someone 10 years older on nights like this. Deliberate, careful, conserving what little energy she had left. Rosie's Diner sat on the corner of Murray Street and the Harbor Access Road in Blackwater Cove, a city built at the edge of the Atlantic where the fishing industry had dried up 30 years ago and nothing had fully replaced it. The buildings along the waterfront were either boarded up or converted into bars that smelled like salt and old wood. Nora had grown up 12 blocks from this diner, watched her mother work the early shift here before moving into nursing, and had ended up here herself after 2 years of trying to make her waitressing job in Portland work out. She wasn't bitter about it. Not exactly. She just didn't talk about what she'd imagined her life looking like at this point. She was rinsing the mop bucket in the back sink when she heard the rain start, hard and sudden, the way it always came off the Atlantic this time of year, not building up gradually, but arriving all at once like a mood. She heard it drumming against the kitchen ventilation hood above the stove, and she thought about the walk to her car, about the broken driver's side window seal that leaked when it rained hard, about the towel she kept on the passenger seat for exactly this purpose. The front door opened. She didn't hear the bell because the rain was too loud. She came out of the kitchen with the mop and found 2 men standing near the entrance, both of them soaking wet, both looking at her with the particular kind of attention that she had learned. Over years of waitressing in places where the clientele was not always entirely law-abiding, meant she should not make any sudden moves. "We're closed," she said. The taller of the 2 stepped forward. He had a jaw like a concrete block, and eyes that registered her the way a camera registers a door. It's watching, without warmth, without interest, just recording. "We know," he said. "Sit down." Nora didn't sit down. She tightened her grip on the mop handle and stayed exactly where she was, near the counter, close to the phone mounted on the wall beside the coffee station. "I'm going to ask you to leave." The second man moved to her right, cutting off the angle to the phone. He was shorter, younger, and he had one hand inside his jacket in a way that was not ambiguous. "Catherine Ellery," the taller man said. "You're her daughter." The name landed differently than it should have. It had been 4 months since the funeral, and Nora still wasn't used to hearing her mother's name spoken by strangers. What about her? She had something. Something that doesn't belong to her. Something our employer would very much like returned. "My mother was a nurse," Nora said. "She didn't have anything." The taller man smiled. It was the kind of smile that does not reach the eyes and is not meant to. That's what we need to talk about. The front door opened again. All three of them turned. The man who stepped through the door was soaking wet, same as the other two, but he wore it differently. Like the rain was something that had happened to his coat rather than to him. I was tall, broad through the shoulders, somewhere in his late 30s, with a face that had been handsome before whatever had happened to it. A scar ran from just below his left ear to the edge of his jaw. His eyes moved across the room in the way of someone who has walked into 100 situations like this and is already cataloging exits, angles, threats. He looked at the two men. Something shifted. It was subtle, the kind of shift that Nora would not have been able to name if she were describing it later, but she felt it the same way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. The taller man straightened. The one near the coffee station took his hand out of his jacket. "We were just leaving," the taller man said. The newcomer didn't say anything. He moved to the counter and sat down on one of the stools, unhurried, like he was there for coffee. He didn't watch the two men leave. He didn't need to. The door closed behind them. Nora stood in the middle of the diner with the mop still in her hands, her heartbeat uneven, the sound of the rain suddenly very loud. "You should lock that," the man at the counter said, nodding toward the door. His voice was low and even, an Atlantic coast accent under it, worn smooth by years of something else. "Who are you?" Nora asked. He looked at her for the first time directly. Not the way the other two had looked at her, like she was a problem to be managed. More like she was something he had been trying not to look at for a long time and had finally run out of reasons. "Lucien Vescari," he said. She knew the name. Everyone in Blackwater Cove knew the name, the same way everyone in a city with a deep harbor knows the names of the things that live in dark water. Lucien Vescari was organized crime, not the street-level kind, not the dockside gambling and protection racket kind, but the kind that existed in the spaces between legitimate business and absolute power, the kind that senators returned calls from. "You should leave too," Nora said. "Those men will be outside," he said, "or they'll be back in an hour with more people. You shouldn't be alone tonight." "I'm not interested in your version of protection." He nodded, like that was fair. "Your mother called me 3 weeks before she died." Nora's grip on the mop handle tightened until her knuckles went pale. "My mother didn't know people like you." "She knew me for 26 years, he said. "She just never told you." The rain hit the windows in a hard gust. The light above the counter flickered once. Nora stood very still and felt the shape of everything she thought she knew about her mother beginning to shift under her like wet ground. "I think," she said quietly, "you need to start from the beginning." Lucien Vescari looked at her with something that might have been relief or might have been the opposite of it. "That's going to take a while." "The diner's closed," she said. "I've got time." Well, he didn't start from the beginning, as it turned out. He started from the middle, which was where he always started things, and Nora had to piece the edges together herself. He ordered coffee she hadn't offered to make, and she made it anyway because her hands needed something to do. She set the mug in front of him and stood on the other side of the counter, arms crossed, watching him the way you watch someone you don't trust but can't quite afford to dismiss. "Your mother's name before she came to Blackwater Cove wasn't Catherine Ellery," he said. "It was Catherine Marsh. Before that it was something else, but that's the name she used for the 11 years she worked for an organization called the Crow Collective." Nora said nothing. The Crow Collective operates as a private investment firm based out of New York. It manages money for approximately 47 clients, none of whom appear in any public filing. The actual business is laundering capital for 7 separate organized crime families operating along the eastern seaboard, plus several offshore entities with ties to Eastern European arms distribution. He said this the way someone recites geography. Matter of fact, slightly bored. "Vincent Crow runs it. He's run it for 30 years. "My mother was a nurse," Nora said again. "Your mother was a forensic accountant," Lucien said. "One of the best I've ever seen, and I've worked with people who charge $400 an hour. She had a talent for it, for seeing the shape of money, the way it moved, where it went when it was trying not to be found." He wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. "She worked for Vincent Crow from the time she was 24 until she was 35. She was loyal. She was precise. She knew where every dollar was buried. And then? And then she found something she wasn't supposed to find." He looked up at her. Vincent had ordered the killing of a federal investigator, a man named James Aldrich. Aldrich had a family, 2 kids. Vincent didn't care. Your mother did. Nora's throat tightened. She thought about her mother, about the woman who had driven her to every school play and every soccer practice and every doctor's appointment, who had worked double shifts to pay for her college application fees, who had kept a deadbolt on every door and checked the locks twice before bed every night of her life. She left, Nora said. She took something with her when she left, Lucian said. A copy of every financial record she'd had access to over 11 years. Names, accounts, shell corporations, dates, amounts. Evidence that would connect Vincent Crowe and everyone associated with the collective to approximately 200 crimes across 3 decades. He paused. She hid it and disappeared. Became Catherine Ellery. Became a nurse. Had you. The counter felt cold under Nora's hands. She never told me. She was protecting you. From what? From the thing that was apparently hunting us anyway? He didn't answer that, which was its own kind of answer. Those men tonight, Nora said, they work for Vincent Crowe. They've been watching you for 6 weeks, since your mother's death triggered an old flag in Crowe's surveillance operation. He assumed she'd passed the records to you before she died. Lucian's jaw tightened slightly. She didn't tell them she hadn't. So she protected me by letting them think I had something that would get me killed. She protected you by calling me, he said, and asking me to make sure you stayed alive long enough to understand what you were inheriting. Nora straightened up. And why would you help her? Why would someone like you? She stopped. She didn't have a clean way to finish the sentence without saying something that was going to land badly, and she was too tired and too shaken to care about that right now. Why would you do that? He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that isn't empty, that has weight in it, history in it. 22 years ago, he said, a man named James Aldrich pulled me out of a situation that should have ended very differently. I was 22. I was running jobs for a crew out of South Boston, and I made a mistake that put me in front of a man who intended to make me disappear. Aldrich was a federal investigator. He had no reason to help me. He helped me anyway. He looked at his coffee. He was the same man your mother watched Vincent Crowe order killed. I owed him a debt I couldn't repay. So I've been paying it sideways, in the only way I know how. Your mother asked me for help. I said yes. Nora stared at him. She was looking at the scar along his jaw, the particular set of his shoulders that said, this was a man who had been hit and expected to be hit again and had made his peace with it. You've been watching me, she said, watching over you. There's a difference. Is there? He met her eyes. The debt collectors who stopped coming around last year. The landlord who dropped your eviction proceedings. The scholarship that covered your nursing certification prep course. He picked up the coffee mug. None of that was luck. The diner felt very small suddenly. The rain was relentless against the windows. Nora thought about the last 12 months, the strange reversals of fortune she'd attributed to timing, to the universe finally balancing something out. She thought about her mother lying in a hospital bed in the last weeks, squeezing Nora's hand and saying, "You're going to be all right," with a certainty that had seemed, at the time, like maternal delusion. Catherine had known. She'd made arrangements. She just hadn't told Nora who was keeping them. "I need you to come with me tonight," Lucian said. "Those men are not the last that Crowe will send. Now that he knows you've been contacted, this escalates. I'm not going anywhere with you. I know. I don't trust you." "I know that too." "Then why it?" "Because you don't have to trust me," he said. "You just have to decide whether the alternative is worse." He stood up, left a folded bill on the counter, too large a bill, the kind of gesture she resented, and buttoned his coat. "I'll be outside. My car is the black Volvo across from the harbor entrance. You have about 20 minutes before Crowe's people regroup and come back in larger numbers." He looked at her one more time. "Your mother trusted me." "My mother apparently had a whole other life that she never mentioned to me," Nora said, "so her references are currently worth about 0. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one. "Fair enough," he said, and he walked out into the rain. Nora locked the front door. She stood in the middle of her closed diner with the overhead lights humming and the rain hammering the windows and her mop still leaning against the counter where she'd left it, and she thought about what to do. She thought about calling the police. She thought about what she would say. Two men came into my diner and were vaguely threatening, and then a known organized crime figure showed up and told me my dead mother was secretly a criminal. And she thought about how that call would go. She thought about the photograph Vincent Crowe had placed on her counter 3 nights ago. The timestamp. The fact that someone had been standing outside her apartment at 7:42 in the morning taking pictures of her leaving for work. She thought about her mother. Catherine Ellery had been, in Nora's experience, the most disciplined and careful person she had ever known. Not warm, exactly, or warm in ways that were specific and deliberate rather than easy. She had taught Nora to check her locks. She had taught her to trust her instincts about people. She had never, in 30 years, introduced a boyfriend, a close friend, a person from her past. She had lived like a woman who had drawn a clean line between before and after and intended to keep them separate forever. She had also, apparently, spent decades maintaining a quiet relationship with a mafia boss she'd never mentioned. Nora thought about what her mother had said 3 weeks before the end, when the morphine was making her drift. "I kept too many secrets, baby. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was just protecting myself from watching you be afraid." She picked up her jacket from behind the counter. She turned off the overhead lights. She went out the back, came around the side of the building, and looked across the harbor access road. The black Volvo was where he'd said it would be. She could see the glow of a phone screen through the rain-blurred windshield. She stood on the sidewalk in the rain for 30 seconds, soaking her jacket through, hating every choice currently available to her. Then she walked across the road and got in the passenger side. Lucien Viscari did not say anything. He put the car in drive and pulled out into the dark street, and the harbor lights moved past the windows. And Nora sat with her wet jacket and her arms wrapped around herself, and her whole life rearranging itself around a set of facts she hadn't known this morning. After 3 blocks, she said, "If you're lying to me about any of this, I will make that a problem for you." "I don't doubt it," he said. They drove in silence through the rain. Somewhere behind them, on Merritt Street, 3 cars pulled up in front of Rosie's diner. The men who got out moved quickly, professionally. They found the diner dark and empty, the back door swinging in the wind. Vincent Crowe's people stood in the rain and radioed back that the girl was gone. 40 miles away, in a glass tower overlooking the New York skyline, a man in a tailored coat read the message and set down his phone with a patience that was more frightening than anger. Vincent Crowe was not the kind of man who panicked. He was the kind of man who planned further ahead than you thought possible, who had moves you hadn't considered, who had been playing this particular game since before Nora Ellery was born. He picked the phone back up and made a call. "Find her," he said, "and find out what Viscari told her. I want to know how much she knows before we make our next move." He hung up. Outside, 47 floors below, the city moved on in its ordinary way, cabs and late workers and restaurants closing up. Nobody aware that somewhere in the machinery of the night, something had just begun that was going to end very badly for a number of people. The only question was which ones. Nora didn't sleep that night. Lucien took her to an apartment above a dry cleaning business on the western edge of the city. Nothing dramatic about it, nothing that suggested what he was. A key from under a loose baseboard, a clean room, 2 windows he checked before he let her sit down, a box of crackers and a jar of peanut butter in the kitchen cupboard, and a half-full bottle of water in the fridge. "Not exactly what I expected," she said, looking around. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Crystal decanters, henchmen." "I have henchmen," he said, without any particular inflection. "I just don't bring them everywhere." He sat in the chair by the window. She sat on the edge of the bed. They didn't talk much. She was too wrung out for more information, and he seemed to understand that, seemed to have a sense of what people needed in the way that men who have spent years reading rooms sometimes develop. He didn't press. He didn't perform reassurance. At some point past 2 in the morning, Nora said, "She really never told you anything about me?" He looked over from the window. "She said you were stubborn, and that you had her eyes, and that she worried about you the way you worry about someone who's going to be fine, but that doesn't make the worrying stop." Nora's throat tightened. She looked at the water bottle in her hands. "She also said," he continued, "that you were the only good thing she'd managed to build in a life that had a lot of damage in it." Those were her words. Nora didn't answer. She set the water bottle on the floor and lay down on the bed, still in her jacket, and stared at the water-stained ceiling. She thought about her mother. She thought about 30 years of silence. She thought about the photograph on the diner counter, Vincent Crow's manicured hand sliding it back into his coat, his smile that contained nothing human. She thought, whatever you were protecting, Mom, whatever you buried and hid and sacrificed yourself to keep safe, I'm going to find it, and I'm going to finish what you started. She fell asleep before she finished the thought, which was probably just as well. Outside, Lucian Vescari sat in the chair by the window and watched the street below, the way he'd been watching over things connected to Catherine Ellery for over 2 decades. The rain didn't stop until nearly morning. She woke up to the sound of someone on a phone. Not loud. Lucian had stepped into the narrow hallway outside the apartment door, and she could only hear the low cadence of his voice through the cheap wall, not the words. But something in the rhythm of it pulled her out of sleep the way a wrong note in a familiar song will catch you even when you're not paying attention. Nora lay still for a moment, jacket still on, the unfamiliar ceiling above her, and let herself orient to where she was and how she'd gotten there and what that meant for the day ahead. It took about 4 seconds. Then her stomach dropped and she sat up. The apartment looked worse in daylight. The walls had that specific shade of off-white that suggested decades of cigarette smoke and multiple rounds of the cheapest possible paint. The window Lucian had checked twice before letting her settle in faced a brick wall 3 feet away. There was no clock, so she checked her phone, 6:48 a.m. 3 missed calls from her coworker Deb, who opened the diner on Thursdays, and 1 text that said, "Are you okay?" Back door was left unlocked, and there's a crack in the front frame. What happened? Nora set the phone face down on the mattress. She heard the hallway conversation end. A moment later, Lucian came back in, closing the door behind him with the careful quietness of someone who is always conscious of sound. He was still in yesterday's clothes, and she realized he hadn't slept. The chair by the window still held the impression of someone who'd sat in it for hours. He looked alert, which was somehow more unsettling than if he'd looked tired. Men like him, she was starting to understand, didn't run on rest. They ran on something else. Vigilance, maybe. Or the particular kind of fuel that comes from living at a permanent angle to danger. Crow's people went back to the diner, he said. No preamble. They pulled street footage from the camera at the Harbor Access intersection. They have the make and partial plate of my car. How long before they trace it? The registration leads to a business entity that goes through 3 levels of holding companies before it touches anything connected to me. Could be a day. Could be less if they have someone on the inside at the DMV, which they might. He moved to the kitchen and ran the tap, filled a glass, and set it on the counter near her without looking at her. We need to move by tonight. Move where? I have a property on the coast, 40 miles north. It's not listed under any name that connects to me. So your solution to me not being safe is to take me somewhere more isolated. He looked at her directly. My solution is to get you somewhere Crow's surveillance network doesn't have coverage while we figure out where your mother hid the records. Nora picked up the glass of water, drank half of it, set it back down. I told you last night, I don't know where the records are. I didn't even know the records existed. I know. So what exactly is the plan here? The plan, he said, starts with what you do know. Your mother's apartment, her belongings, anything she left you or sent you in the last year of her life. He pulled out the chair across from the kitchen counter and sat down. People who hide things don't hide them randomly. They hide them somewhere that means something, somewhere they can find again if they need to, somewhere that would mean something to the right person and nothing to everyone else. Nora thought about her mother's apartment, which she had spent 3 weeks cleaning out after the funeral. The careful, ordered life of a woman who owned almost nothing sentimental, or so Nora had thought. Neutral art prints, practical furniture, a kitchen organized to within an inch of its life. The only truly personal items had been a small jewelry box, a collection of nursing textbooks, and a framed photograph of Nora at age 7 standing in front of the Blackwater Cove lighthouse, squinting against the sun. She stopped thinking. What? Lucian said. She shook her head slightly. Nothing. I need to get into her apartment. Some of her things are still in storage. I haven't finished dealing with the estate. We can do that today. Carefully. Carefully, she repeated. Right. She stood and moved to the small bathroom to wash her face, and she looked at herself in the water-spotted mirror for a moment. Still in yesterday's clothes, dark circles, the particular expression of someone who has slept 4 hours in an unfamiliar room, and is now significantly less certain of reality than they were 24 hours ago. She ran cold water over her wrists, steadied herself. She came back out to find Lucien on the phone again, this time in the room, and she caught enough to understand he was talking to someone inside his own organization. The clipped language, the pauses that meant the other person was reporting rather than conversing. His face while he listened was very still, and that stillness had an edge to it that she hadn't seen the night before. He hung up and looked at her. "There's a problem," he said. "Bigger than the ones we already have?" "Someone inside my organization told Crow's people where I keep secondary properties." He said it flatly, the way you report a fact that is going to have significant consequences, and you're already 2 steps ahead of those consequences. "I have a leak." The room felt smaller. "You didn't know?" "I suspected. Last night confirmed it." His jaw tightened fractionally. 2 of the locations I had flagged as possible safe houses were photographed this morning. Someone with inside access gave Crow a list. Nora absorbed this. "So someone who works for you is working for Vincent Crow?" "Yes." "Which means we can't use any of your resources." "We can use very few of them, carefully." "You keep using that word." "Because it's the right word." He stood and moved to the window, staying to the side of it, not putting himself in the sight line from the street. Old habit, she realized, deeply grooved. He'd probably done it so many times it was unconscious. "I have 3 people I trust completely. The rest of my operation is now compromised until I can identify the source." 3 people, she said. "Out of how many?" He glanced at her. 31. She let that sit for a second. That must be a comfortable feeling. Something shifted in his expression, not quite irritation, but close to it. "I've operated in worse conditions." "I'm sure you have," she crossed her arms. "What about the federal people? You said last night there's a prosecutor who's been working with you." He paused, just a beat, but she caught it. "What?" she said. "Elena Marsh," he said. "She's been building a case against the Crow Collective for 4 years. We've had an arrangement, information I provide in exchange for certain protections. But she can't move publicly yet. The case needs the financial records your mother copied. Without them, everything we have is circumstantial. Testimony from sources who could be discredited, paper trails that Crow's lawyers have already built cover stories for." He turned from the window. "The ledger, your mother's copy of the financial records, is the only thing that makes the case watertight. Without it, Crow walks. Has walked for 30 years. And you've known this?" "For 4 years. Yes." Nora looked at him carefully. There was something in what he'd just said that she needed to examine, and she took a moment to do it, the way her mother had taught her to examine things she suspected she was being steered away from. "If someone gives you information in a sequence," Catherine had said once, in the offhand way she sometimes delivered things that mattered, "pay attention to what comes first and what comes last. The middle is where the truth lives. You've been working with a federal prosecutor to bring down Vincent Crow," Nora said slowly. "For 4 years. Which means you knew about my mother's records for at least that long. Which means you knew..." She stopped. "You knew where the evidence was, or at least that it existed, when you were paying off my landlord and covering my debt collectors." "Yes." "You were keeping me close," she said, "in case you needed me." The silence between them changed quality. It went from the silence of 2 people deciding how much to say to the silence of 2 people who have arrived at something that can't be taken back. "That's not the only reason," he said, "but it's one of the reasons." He didn't answer, which was, again, its own answer. Nora uncrossed her arms. She picked up her jacket from the bed, shook it out, put it on. The motion was deliberate, something to do with her hands while she decided how angry she was and what to do with that anger in a situation where anger was a luxury she couldn't quite afford. "You should have told me that last night," she said. "Last night you didn't trust me enough to get in the car." "Last night I didn't trust you and I was right." She zipped the jacket. "You were using my mother's friendship with you as currency. You were banking on the fact that I'd be easier to access than a dead woman's hidden records." "I was making sure you didn't get killed before we found the records," he said, and his voice had gone flat and hard in a way that was the first time she'd heard anything real in it. "Those are not the same thing. I kept you alive, Nora. Whatever my reasons, that part is not complicated." She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them moved. "Okay," she said finally. We'll table this. We need to get into my mother's storage unit. After that, we figure out the next step. She moved toward the door. But understand something. I'm not a piece on your board. If you treat me like one again, I'm out. I'll take my chances with Crow's people on my own before I let you manage me. Understood, he said. I'm not asking for your agreement. I'm telling you how it is. A pause. Something in his face that she couldn't fully read. Understood, he said again, and this time it meant something different. Getting to the storage facility on the south side of Blackwater Cove required 2 bus transfers and a 15-minute walk in the cold, which Lucian clearly found impractical and which Nora found preferable to using any vehicle connected to him. He said nothing about it. He matched her pace and kept himself angled slightly behind her in the way that she recognized, after a while, was a covering position. He was reading the street while she navigated, dividing the labor without being asked. She filed that away. Not because it made her trust him, but because it told her something about how he thought. The storage facility was a low-ceilinged concrete building operated by a retired shipyard worker named Cal, who recognized Nora and let her in without logging the visit, which was one of the few things that went smoothly that morning. Unit 14 was at the back, Catherine's entire earthly accumulation fitting into a 12-by-12 space with room left over. 3 boxes of clothes destined for donation. 2 boxes of nursing textbooks. 1 box of kitchen items. A small dresser. A mirror in a plain wood frame. And a large flat cardboard box that Nora had sealed and labeled Misc/Photos and not been able to bring herself to open since she'd packed it. She opened it now. Lucian stood near the entrance of the storage unit and did not offer to help and did not ask questions. He watched the corridor. She appreciated it more than she expected to. The box held the things Catherine Ellery had kept in her bedside drawer, her desk, and the small shelf above the kitchen table. The texture of an ordinary life, except that nothing about this life had been ordinary, apparently, and Nora was now looking at these objects with eyes she hadn't had 3 months ago. There were birthday cards Nora had made in elementary school. A small photo album, chronological, containing pictures of Nora from birth through college graduation. A handful of smooth stones from the beach. 2 pens. A folded piece of paper that turned out to be a recipe for her mother's lentil soup. And at the bottom, wrapped in a cloth that had once been a blue kitchen towel, a small wooden box about the size of a hardcover book, with a simple brass latch and no lock. Nora lifted it out, turned it over. On the underside, in her mother's small, careful handwriting, for Nora, when you need it most. Her hands were not steady. She opened the latch. Inside, nested in tissue paper, was a photograph she didn't recognize. Her mother, much younger, maybe 25, standing on the dock outside the Blackwater Cove lighthouse with a man Nora had never seen. He was tall, light-haired, laughing at something off-camera. On the back of the photograph, J.A. Blackwater, 1997. The light remembers. Beneath the photograph was a folded note, and beneath the note, a small brass key. She unfolded the note. The handwriting was her mother's, but shakier than she'd ever seen it. Written, she guessed, sometime near the end. Baby, if you're reading this, then I didn't find a way to tell you in person, which means I ran out of time and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for a great many things. The key opens a box at the lighthouse. The keeper's room, loose stone third from the left on the north-facing interior wall, about 4 feet up. There's something inside that I kept for 30 years because I believed the right moment would come. Tell Lucian it's there. He'll know what to do. I trust him. You can too, even though I know you won't want to. I is, in his way, a man who keeps his word. That's rarer than you know. I love you more than I was ever able to say out loud. That was my failure, not yours. Mom. Nora sat on the concrete floor of the storage unit and held the note in both hands and breathed. She didn't cry. She wanted to, felt the pressure of it somewhere behind her sternum, enormous and architectural, the kind of grief that has weight and mass and takes up space. But she didn't have room for it right now, and she thought somewhat distantly that her mother would understand that. Catherine Ellery had been, whatever else she was, a practical woman. She folded the note, closed the wooden box, put it under her arm. Lucien, she said. He appeared at the unit entrance in 3 seconds. Read her face, not her expression exactly, but whatever was underneath it. You found something. My mother left me a key, she said, and a location. She paused. The lighthouse. He was still for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "Of course she did." You know what that means? The Blackwater Lighthouse has been decommissioned for 15 years. It was part of a shoreline property dispute that's tied up in county court. Nobody goes there. He looked at the box under her arm. It's also one of Vincent Crow's peripheral holdings. He owns the company that's been contesting the property rights for the last decade. The cold feeling was back. More specific this time. He's been keeping that property in litigation. To keep people off it, Lucian said, which means either he never found what your mother hid there, or he knows exactly what's there, and he's been waiting for someone to go get it, Nora finished. The corridor light flickered. Down the row of storage units, something metal settled with a clank. Normal sounds. She was jumping at normal sounds. We can't go to the lighthouse yet, Lucian said. Not until dark. Not without more preparation. I know. Which means we have approximately 12 hours to get somewhere safe while Crow's people are narrowing their search. I know that too. She stood up. You said you had 3 people you trusted. Yes. Call them. He already had his phone out. The 3 people were a woman named Sasha, who ran a legitimate marine equipment repair business on the North Docks and had been passing information to Lucian for 6 years, a man named Dario, former military, who operated a private security firm and owed Lucian something she didn't ask about, and a second man named Webb, who was maybe 55 and drove a city water department van, and whose precise role in all of this remained usefully vague. They gathered in the back room of Sasha's repair shop, the smell of machine oil and salt water, a folding table, 5 mismatched chairs, 1 space heater rattling in the corner. Not a war room, just a room where people who couldn't be seen together were currently together. Nora sat across from Sasha and understood immediately that this woman had expected her to be different, smaller, maybe. More frightened. Sasha was in her 40s, compact and direct, with the particular air of someone who has spent years in a predominantly male environment and long since stopped spending energy managing anyone's comfort about that. So you're the nurse, Sasha said. Waitress, Nora corrected. I thought you were training to be a nurse. In my spare time, which has been limited. She glanced at Lucian across the table. Tell me about the leak. Who knows about the lighthouse? Sasha looked at Lucian. A conversation in a look. How much does she know? How much do we say? And Lucien's expression settling into something that meant tell her. 3 people in my organization have access to the property files, Sasha said, which includes the list of secondary safe houses and holdings I've flagged as secure. Those files were accessed 2 nights ago. Before I came in from Crow's people at the diner, Nora said. So whoever it is, they knew where Lucian would move first. They knew where he'd move you, Sasha said. Specifically. The room was quiet for a moment. Dario, who had not spoken yet, said, It's Marco. Flat, declarative, like he was reporting weather. Lucian's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. Something that had been braced against this particular word landed anyway. You're sure? Cell triangulation from last night puts him 2 blocks from Rosie's diner at the time Crow's people showed up. He's the only person who knew you were running a watch on the girl. Dario set a phone on the table with a screenshot of what looked like a cell carrier record. I've been sitting on this for 6 hours waiting to see if I was wrong. Marco. She didn't know who Marco was, but she knew what the name meant by watching Lucian's face. Not a peripheral contact. Someone close. How long? Lucian said. Based on what I can trace? At least 8 months. 8 months. Nora did the math quietly. 8 months meant that whoever Marco was had been feeding information to Vincent Crow for the better part of a year, which meant that the last 8 months of Lucian's operation, every move, every arrangement, every carefully managed piece of the long strategy to dismantle the Crow Collective, had potentially been visible to the enemy. Where is he now? Lucian asked. His apartment, as of 40 minutes ago. Dario paused. Lucien, he has a wife, 2 kids. Lucian's jaw tightened. I'm not going to hurt his family, Dario. I know that. I'm telling you because it matters to how this goes. If he thinks you know, he'll run to Crow, Lucian said, and Crow will know we've identified the leak, which changes his timeline. He was quiet for a moment, working something through behind his eyes. Leave Marco where he is. Don't approach him. Don't signal. Don't change anything he'd notice. If he thinks we don't know, he'll keep feeding Crow the information we want him to have. You want to use him, Sasha said. I want to control what Crow thinks he knows about where we're going tonight. Nora leaned forward. You want to feed false information through someone you know is a traitor. Yes. And if Marco figures out what you're doing, then we'll know by whatever changes in Crow's behavior. He looked at her directly. This is how it works. You use what you have. She sat back. She was thinking about something that had been nagging at her since Sasha had said the list of secondary safe houses and holdings I've flagged as secure. You said 3 people have access to those files. Yes. And Dario just told you it's Marco, which means you had 2 other suspects. She looked at him. Were you looking at me? The silence that followed was extremely brief. Brief enough that she could have let it go. She didn't. For about 6 hours, Lucienne said, between when you got in my car and when Dario confirmed the cell triangulation. Sasha was looking at the table. 6 hours, Nora said. You spent 6 hours deciding whether I was working for Vincent Crow. I spent 6 hours eliminating the possibility. That's a different thing. It's not that different. She was not raising her voice. She had no interest in raising her voice. That was her mother's skill, the low, cold delivery that hit harder than shouting. While you were sitting in that chair last night pretending to watch the street for my safety, you were evaluating whether I was a threat. Yes, he said. That's what I do. That is exactly what I do with everyone. And it is the reason I am still alive after 20 years in a business that eats people whole. You wanted honesty. That's honest. She looked at him for a long moment. Webb, who had been silent in the corner this entire time, and whom she had nearly forgotten was in the room, cleared his throat. For what it's worth, he said, he cleared you pretty fast. The 6 hours includes sleep time. I didn't sleep, Lucian said. You cleared her fast, Webb said. That's the point I was making. Nora stood up. Walked to the small window that looked out over the dock. The harbor flat and gray under November sky. A few working boats coming in from the overnight run. She stood there with her back to the room and took inventory of how she felt and what she was going to do about it. She was frightened. She had been frightened since the moment Lucian Viscari walked through her diner door, and the fear had not lessened. It had just been pushed into the background by the relentless accumulation of things requiring immediate attention. She was also angry, and the anger was cleaner and more useful than the fear, so she held on to it. And underneath both of those, something that had started as a sentence in her mother's handwriting and was now lodged somewhere in her chest like a splinter. He is, in his way, a man who keeps his word. Tonight, she said to the window, we go to the lighthouse. I go in first because my mother left the key to me and the note to me, and if there's anything in that room that's rigged or flagged to the wrong person, I want it to be me who triggers it. She turned around. And nobody tells Marco anything until I'm already inside. Nobody argued. She took that as agreement. The afternoon was slow and had the quality of time before a storm. Not peaceful, not exactly, but pressurized. Webb disappeared to do whatever Webb did. Dario set up a loose perimeter around Sasha's building. Sasha made sandwiches that nobody fully ate and strong coffee that everybody drank. Nora sat with the wooden box in her lap and thought about the lighthouse. She had been there twice as a child. Her mother had taken her, never explaining why, never making a particular occasion of it, just appearing one Saturday morning with the car already running and saying, "Put your shoes on, we're going to the coast." They'd walked the perimeter of the decommissioned lighthouse while Catherine said almost nothing, and Nora, who had been 7 and then 9 on the respective visits, had collected rocks and watched the water and felt the particular smallness of standing next to something built to be seen from miles away. The photograph in this box. Her mother at 25, standing on that dock with the man who was laughing. J.A. Blackwater, 1997. The Light Remembers. James Aldrich. The man Vincent Crow had ordered killed. The man who had pulled Lucian Viscari out of a situation that should have killed him 22 years ago. She crossed to where Lucian was sitting, on a shipping crate near the back wall, phone in hand, running through what she imagined was an increasingly complicated series of operational problems. "James Aldrich," she said, "you told me your debt to him was the reason you protected my mother." He looked up. "Yes." But Aldrich worked for the federal government, a federal investigator. She sat down across from him on the edge of a workbench. He would have been building a case against organized crime, against people like you. People like me, yes. So why did he help you, 22 years ago, when you were running jobs for a crew in South Boston? Why would a federal investigator pull you out? Lucian was quiet for a moment. Because I was 16 years old, he said, and the crew I was running for had recruited me when I was 13, and Aldrich... He stopped, looked at his phone, put it down. Aldrich thought there was another way. He thought I was worth trying to save. A pause. I was half right. He saved my life. I didn't give up the life he hoped I would, but I kept his name with me, and I kept a line I wouldn't cross because of him. What line? Children, he said. Families. People who didn't choose this. Whatever else I've done, his voice was flat, matter of fact, not asking for absolution. That line I kept. She looked at him. This man who had paid her mother's medical bills from the shadows of an organization she'd never been told existed, who had watched over her own life for years without revealing himself, who had spent the night in a chair because someone had to watch the street, who had also, for 6 hours, considered the possibility that she might be his enemy. She thought that both things could be true, that a person could be genuinely dangerous and genuinely trying to do right by a debt they felt in their bones. That people were not one thing. She had been raised by a woman who was living proof of that. When this is over, she said, I'm going to have a very long list of things I need to think about. I know. You're on the list. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. Not quite anything she had a word for yet. I know that too. At Nini 47 that evening, Nora Ellery stood in the dark outside Rosie's diner. She had come back alone, against Lucian's explicit objection, while Dario drove the decoy route and Webb fed information to Marco through a deliberately casual slip in conversation that Marco would carry straight to Vincent Crowe within the hour. The misdirection was Lucian's design, and it was probably good. Nora had agreed to it. She had not agreed to skip one piece of it. There was something in the diner she needed, a thing she had remembered while sitting in Sasha's marine shop drinking bad coffee, a thing her mother had left with her 18 months ago, before the diagnosis, handing it over in the diner parking lot on one of Catherine's rare visits with no explanation beyond, "Keep this somewhere safe, would you? I just want someone else to have it." A small USB drive. It had been in the zippered pocket of Nora's work apron for 18 months. Unwashed, because she'd meant to move it and kept forgetting. Under a layer of diner debris at the bottom of the apron pocket, receipt paper, a pen cap, a broken hair elastic. She let herself in through the back. The diner was cold and dark and smelled like old coffee and the particular stillness of closed businesses. She didn't turn on any lights. She went to the staff hooks in the back hallway. Her spare apron was there. She unzipped the pocket. The drive was there. Small, black, the size of a thumbnail. She held it in her palm and thought about her mother handing it over in the parking lot with that deliberate casualness, that studied nonchalance that Catherine Ellery deployed when something mattered more than she wanted to show. She closed her fist around it. She turned to leave. The back door opened. Not Lucian, not Dario, not anyone she recognized. The woman who stepped through the door was in her late 30s, expensive coat, dark hair pulled back in a way that said professional rather than decorative. She had a badge clipped to her belt, and her right hand was away from her body in the practiced position of someone who might need to reach for something quickly. She looked at Nora. "Nora Ellery," she said. Not a question. "Yes." "I'm Elena Marsh," she said, "federal prosecutor. I've been trying to reach Lucian Viscari for 6 hours. She glanced at the closed fist in Nora's hand, then back up to her face. "I think you just found something your mother left you." Nora's pulse was loud in her ears. "And I think," Elena Marsh said, taking one step further into the dark diner, "that you and I need to have a conversation that Lucian Viscari is not present for." The door swung closed behind her, and in that moment, standing in the cold dark of her closed diner, her dead mother's USB drive in her fist, a federal prosecutor blocking her exit, and Lucian Viscari's operation already in motion 40 blocks away, Nora understood that she was no longer adjacent to this war. She was in the center of it, and there was no version of the next 12 hours that did not require her to choose, clearly and finally, who she was going to trust with the thing her mother had died protecting. Nora didn't move. That was the first thing, the absolute stillness that came over her in the dark diner, the kind of stillness that isn't calm but is the body's way of buying time while the mind catches up to what just happened. Elena Marsh stood 3 feet inside the back door with her hand away from her side and her badge catching the thin light from the alley, and Nora stood near the staff hooks with her dead mother's USB drive pressed into her palm, hard enough to leave a mark. "How did you find me?" Nora said. "I've had a soft tail on you since yesterday morning." Elena's voice was measured, not aggressive, the voice of someone who has learned to enter rooms without triggering flight responses. "Not Crow's people. Mine. 2 plainclothes agents a block radius. When you left Sasha Volin's building an hour ago without Viscari, I made the call to intercept." "You've been watching Sasha's building." "I've been watching Lucian Viscari for 4 years." She paused. "Which means I've been watching everywhere he goes and everyone he talks to, including you, since last night." Nora's hand tightened around the drive. "If you've been watching, you know what's happening. You know about Crow's people and the leak in Viscari's organization and the lighthouse." "I know about the lighthouse," Elena said. "That's why I'm here." Something in how she said it, not the words, the weight under the words, the particular quality of someone delivering information they've been carrying too long. "What about the lighthouse?" Nora said. Elena Marsh reached into her coat pocket and placed a photograph on the nearest table. She didn't move toward Nora to hand it to her, just set it down and stepped back, which was a deliberate choice, and Nora recognized it as one. She picked it up. It was a surveillance photograph. Long lens, time-stamped from 3 days ago. 2 men on the dock outside the decommissioned lighthouse. One of them was a heavy-set man in a work jacket she didn't recognize. The other one was Lucian Viscari. Nora stared at the photograph for 5 full seconds. "He was there 3 days ago," Elena said. 2 days before you found the key. 1 day before Vincent Crow's people walked into your diner." She let that sit for a moment. "I need you to ask yourself what that means." The cold in the diner was different now. Not the draft from the broken frame cold of last night. Something that came from inside. "You're suggesting he already knew about the lighthouse." "I'm presenting you with a photograph of him at the lighthouse 3 days ago and asking you what you think." "That's not the same as evidence of anything." "No," Elena said. "It's not. But it's a question you should be asking, and I don't think you've had the opportunity to ask it yet because you've been inside his operation since last night." She pulled out the chair across from Nora and sat down, making herself smaller, less threatening, and Nora noted that too. "I'm not here to tell you Viscari is your enemy. I'm here to tell you that you don't fully know what he is yet, and until you do, you should not hand him whatever your mother left you." Nora set the photograph back on the table. "What do you want?" "The same thing your mother wanted," Elena said. "Vincent Crow in a federal courtroom. Every name in those records connected to a charge that sticks. The whole thing, done properly, done once, so it can't be undone." She leaned forward slightly. "I've been building this case for 4 years. I have testimony, financial traces, shell corporation structures, 3 cooperating witnesses in protective custody. What I don't have is the original ledger. The source document that makes all of it coherent and airtight. Your mother's records are the keystone. Without them, Crow's defense dismantles everything else I have piece by piece." "Lucian told me the same thing." "I know he did. He's been telling me the same thing for 4 years. Something shifted in her expression. Not cynicism exactly, but something adjacent to it. "What Lucian hasn't told you is that our arrangement has a parameter he set himself 4 years ago that I agreed to and have regretted since." Nora waited. "If the records surface," Elena said, "Lucian controls when and how they're presented. Not the federal government, not my office. Him. He built that into our arrangement as a non-negotiable condition, and I agreed because I needed his information and I thought—" She stopped, reorganized. "I thought his interest in bringing down Crow was the same as mine. Prosecution, accountability, the legal end." She looked at Nora directly. "I'm no longer sure that's true." "What do you think his interest is?" "I think Lucian Viscari wants to destroy Vincent Crow," Elena said. "And I think destroying him and prosecuting him are not the same thing. One of those outcomes requires evidence presented in a court of law. The other one—" She let the sentence end where it was. Nora sat down. Her legs had made the decision before her mind caught up. She sat in the nearest chair and put the USB drive on the table between them, not handing it over, just placing it in the visible space, acknowledging its existence. "You said you've been watching me since last night," Nora said. "So you know he spent the night in a chair watching the street?" "Yes." "You know he's the one who told me about my mother's real history, who gave me the first information I had?" "Yes." "And you're still telling me not to trust him?" "I'm telling you to trust carefully," Elena said. "There's a difference." She looked at the drive on the table. "That's what she sent with you. She gave it to me 18 months ago, before the diagnosis. Do you know what's on it?" "No." Elena nodded slowly. She reached into her coat again and produced a small laptop. Personal, not government issue, which was its own signal. She set it on the table beside the photograph. "I'd like to look at it with you. Here. Now. Before Viscari knows you have it, and before Crow's people figure out that Viscari's decoy route is a decoy route, which they will, in about," she checked her watch, "40 minutes if Marco runs to form." Nora looked at the laptop, looked at the drive, thought about her mother in a parking lot 18 months ago, handing over a small black piece of plastic with that carefully casual expression. "Keep this somewhere safe, would you? Not somewhere in my house. Not somewhere I'll remember. In your apron pocket, where nobody who's watching me will think to look." She picked up the drive. She plugged it into Elena Marsh's laptop. The drive contained two things. The first was a folder of compressed files, financial records, the same kind Elena had described, account numbers and shell corporation structures, and transaction histories spanning 3 decades. They didn't need to fully open them to see what they were. The file names alone told the story, dates, amounts, codes that Elena clearly recognized because she went very still when they came up on the screen. The second thing was a video file. It was 47 minutes long. The file name was a date, 11/14/1997. They looked at each other. Nora hit play. The footage was old, the slightly washed-out quality of late 90s digital video, the frames slightly unstable, clearly shot from something hidden. A room she didn't recognize. Expensive furniture, a long conference table, the kind of room where serious money made serious decisions. 7 men around the table. She didn't recognize 6 of them. The 7th was Vincent Crow. Younger, mid-30s, thinner, the same precise posture and the same quality of absolute ownership of every space he occupied, but unmistakably him. The audio was not perfect, but it was clear enough. She heard Vincent Crow say the name James Aldrich. She heard him say not a warning, not a message, "I want him gone before the end of the month." She heard a man across the table say his family. She heard Vincent Crow say, "I don't care what happens to his family." The recording was dated November 14, 1997. James Aldrich, according to what Lucian had told her, had been killed in December of that year. Nora sat in the cold, dark diner and watched a 30-year-old video of a man ordering the death of a federal investigator and understood that her mother had been in that room, or close enough to it, with something hidden well enough to capture this. For 30 years, Catherine Ellery had been carrying this. Elena Marsh had gone very quiet beside her. When Nora paused the video, the prosecutor's expression was the expression of someone who has been handed the thing they've been looking for long enough that the getting of it feels almost unreal. "She had this the whole time," Elena said, very quietly. "She had this the whole time," Nora confirmed. They sat with that for a moment. Then Nora's phone buzzed. She looked at it. "Lucian, where are you? Call me now." She turned the phone face down. "I need to know about the lighthouse photograph," she said to Elena. 3 days ago. What was he doing there?" Elena closed the laptop, slowly, like she was buying herself a moment to decide what to say. "The man with him in the photograph is a contractor, demolition specialist. He's done work for Viscari before. Legitimate work, site clearance for a property development in Gloucester." She paused. "But I don't know why Viscari was at the lighthouse specifically. I don't know if he found something there or was looking for something or—" She stopped again. "I genuinely don't know. And that's the part that concerns me. Because if he already knew where the records were, then the last 24 hours of his behavior doesn't entirely make sense," Elena said. "Why bring you in? Why tell you about your mother's history? Why go through the motion of having you find the key if he could have gone to that lighthouse himself?" "Because he couldn't get in," Nora said slowly. The lighthouse is in property litigation that Crow controls. If Vescari goes in openly, Crow knows about it within hours. But if I go in... She stopped. You're the daughter of the woman who hid the evidence, Elena said. You have emotional rationale for being there. You have the key. If anyone can access that lighthouse without immediately triggering Crow's attention, it's you. He needed me to be the one to go in. Maybe. I don't know. I don't have enough to tell you he's been manipulating you. I have enough to tell you to ask the question. Nora stood up. The chair scraped against the floor, and the sound was too loud in the quiet, and she didn't care. She walked to the window and stood to the side of it. She was already doing it automatically, the thing she'd noticed Lucian doing, keeping herself out of sight lines. And she looked at the alley and the wet street beyond it, and she breathed. Her mother had trusted him. Her mother had also spent 30 years hiding an existence she'd never disclosed to her only child. The trust of someone who kept secrets that large was not a simple thing to evaluate. Her phone buzzed again. She picked it up. Not Lucian this time. An unknown number. She answered. Miss Ellery. A man's voice, composed, unhurried. The voice of someone who has never had to raise it to be heard. I think it's time we spoke directly. She knew the voice. She didn't know how she knew it. She had heard it once, briefly, in a diner 3 days ago, and the human brain's ability to file and retrieve a voice that has frightened it was apparently excellent. Vincent Crow. You're going to tell me to stay out of the lighthouse, she said. A pause. Brief. And she thought she heard something in it. Not surprise. Recalibration. I'm going to tell you, he said, that there are aspects of your current situation that you haven't been told, and that the man who's been telling you he's protecting you has been running a play with you as the piece since long before your mother died. You're not a credible source on Lucian Viscari's character. No, he agreed. But I might be a credible source on the financial arrangement between Viscari's organization and mine. He paused again, longer this time. Did you know that for the 18 months before your mother's death, a private account connected to Viscari's holdings was receiving monthly deposits from a shell company registered to the Crow Collective? Nora's hand tightened on the phone. He's been on my payroll, Vincent Crow said, with the unhurried precision of a man placing cards face up on a table. Not fully, not completely, but enough. Enough that the question you should be asking is not whether to trust him. The question you should be asking is what he intended to do with those records once you led him to them. She hung up. She stood absolutely still for 4 seconds. Then she turned to Elena Marsh. Tell me, she said, the 4 years you've had your arrangement with Viscari, has any money ever moved between his holdings and Crow's? Elena's expression did not change, but she didn't answer immediately, and that was its own answer. Elena. There was a period, Elena said carefully, approximately 2 years ago, a series of transactions that my forensic accountants flagged but could not conclusively connect to Viscari directly. They ran through 3 intermediary entities. How long did the transactions run? 8 months? Nora's mind did the arithmetic. 8 months, 2 years ago, would have ended approximately 14 months ago, which was 4 months before her mother's diagnosis, which was 6 months before Lucian apparently became aware that Crow's surveillance operation had flagged Nora as a person of interest. He could have been running a play inside Crow's organization, she said, feeding them money to buy access, the way he feeds Marco information to control what Crow thinks he knows. That's one interpretation, Elena said. What's another one? Silence. What's another one, Elena? That Viscari had an agreement with Crow, she said quietly, and that agreement included delivering the records, and that your mother's call to him, 3 weeks before she died, changed something, changed the calculation, changed his intention, or presented an opportunity he hadn't anticipated. She met Nora's eyes. I don't know which one it is. I haven't known for 2 years. That's why I'm here talking to you in the dark, instead of having this conversation with him. Nora's phone buzzed again. Lucian. She looked at it, then it stopped buzzing, and a different alert came through. Not a call. A text from Dario's number. Lighthouse. Now. Something's wrong. She showed it to Elena. Elena stood up immediately. They took Elena's car, which was faster and less traceable than anything Nora had available, and Elena drove the way someone drives who has done tactical driving training, not recklessly, but with the complete lack of hesitation at intersections, and the continuous mirror checking that made it clear she was always tracking what was behind them. The coast road north of Blackwater Cove was empty at 10:30 at night. The lighthouse sat at the end of a gravel access track behind a chain-link fence posted with county litigation notices and no trespassing signs that had been weathering for years. Elena cut the headlights 300 meters out. They sat in the dark car and looked at the lighthouse. There were lights in the keeper's room. "Someone's already inside," Nora said. "Yes." Elena's voice was very even. She was looking at the lighthouse with the expression of someone doing rapid operational calculation. "That's not Dario. Dario wouldn't have lights." "Crow's people." "Possibly." She paused. "Or Vescari moved the timeline without telling us." Nora's jaw tightened. "Dario's text said something's wrong." "Yes, which means Dario is out there and can see what we can't from here." Elena's hand moved toward her hip. The reflex of someone checking that a weapon is where it's supposed to be. "Where would your mother's hiding place be, specifically?" "Keeper's room. North-facing wall. Loose stone, third from the left. 4 feet up." "If someone's in that room right now and they know what they're looking for, then we're out of time," Nora said. She had the door open before Elena finished the sentence. "Nora." She was already moving. She crossed the gravel in the dark at a controlled run, staying low, keeping to the edge of the access track, where the scrub grass muffled her footsteps. The chain-link fence had a section near the base that had been pulled loose and refastened inadequately. She found it by feel in the dark, worked it open, went through. The lighthouse door was not locked. It was not even fully closed. She pushed through into the base level. Cold stone, the smell of salt and disuse, the beam of a flashlight above her, moving. Someone was in the keeper's room, 1 level up. She could hear footsteps. She took the stairs. At the top, she stopped. The keeper's room was small, stone walls, a rusted iron fixture where the light mechanism had once been. 2 narrow windows with the glass long since gone. One of the windows faced north. Lucien Vescari was standing at the north wall. He had already found it. The loose stone was pulled out and sitting on the floor at his feet, and in his hand was a metal document case. Waterproof, old, the kind of thing built to last decades in a stone wall. He was in the process of opening it when she came through the doorway. He looked up. Their eyes met across the room. "How long have you known?" she said. He set the case down. Not putting it down to free his hands, there was nothing threatening in the gesture. It was more like setting something aside in order to look at her properly. "About the lighthouse? Since I started working with Elena 4 years ago. She told me your mother had been stationed here for 2 weeks in 1997 as part of covering her exit from the collective. It was the last place Catherine spent significant time before she became Catherine Ellery. So you've known for 4 years where the records were." "I suspected. I didn't know for certain until 3 days ago when I came out to assess the structure." He paused. "The stone your mother used is original 19th century granite. I needed to know if it was still structurally intact or if the hiding place had been compromised by the building's deterioration over the years." "That's why you were here 3 days ago." "Yes." "With a demolition contractor." A pause. "Fractional." "He does structural assessment work. Not just demolition. I needed someone who could tell me if the wall was stable." She walked into the room. Not toward him. To the side, to the window, where she could see both him and the doorway. Old instinct, and she recognized that too, recognized that she was moving differently than she had 48 hours ago, that the shape of how she occupied a room had already changed. "Crow called me," she said. Something shifted in his face. "He told me money moved between your holdings and his organization, 18 months of deposits, 2 years ago. Elena confirmed there were transactions she couldn't conclusively attribute to you." The room was very quiet. Somewhere below, the wind came through the open door and moved up the stairwell. "It's true," he said. She had prepared herself for a denial. The admission hit differently. A straight-line impact, no cushion. 8 months, he said. "I ran a false flag operation inside the Crow Collective's own financial system. I moved money from accounts. I controlled into Crow's shell structures and then back out through a different route, creating the appearance of a payment relationship while actually building a paper trail of Crow's willingness to accept funds from my organization, which would have been evidence of direct financial cooperation between his collective and my operation, usable against him. He looked at her steadily. It didn't work. Crow's accountants identified the pattern before I could complete the trail, so I pulled out. And you told Elena about this? I told Elena there had been financial interaction between my holdings and Crow's that was part of an operation. I did not give her the full details because I didn't trust her office's security at the time. He stopped. I've since concluded that was a mistake. You were running an unauthorized operation inside a federal investigation. Yes. Which Elena might interpret as obstruction. Yes. Which is why you didn't fully disclose it. Yes. He said the words without defensiveness, without apology. Just the flat admission of choices made and their consequences. I've been running this the way I know how to run things, which is not the same as the way it should be run in a world where courts and laws function correctly. I know that. I've always known that. The difference between me and Vincent Crow is not that I operate within sanctioned limits. It's what I do with what I take. Nora looked at the document case on the floor between them. If you've known for 4 years, she said, why did you need me? Why the last 24 hours? Why the diner, the safe house, Sasha's shop, all of it? Why not come here yourself 3 days ago and get it? Because it's not enough, he said. The ledger, the financial records, they document the crimes, but they don't connect Crow personally to the order of murder. They don't have him. They have the architecture of his empire. You need both. He paused. Your mother, I didn't know about the USB drive until you found it tonight. I didn't know she had a video recording. I knew she'd kept the ledger. I didn't know she'd kept the other thing. How did you know I found a USB drive? Dario saw you come out of the diner with Elena Marsh. He told me. He held her gaze. I know you showed it to her. I know what's on it. You know what's on it. Catherine told me in the last conversation we had. She said she had a recording. She said she'd never been able to use it because she had no way to guarantee that presenting it wouldn't get her killed before it could be protected. She was waiting for the right moment. His jaw tightened. She ran out of time. The grief that had been waiting in Nora's chest all day moved, not breaking through, just shifting, making itself felt. She trusted you, Nora said, even knowing about the financial arrangement, even knowing about everything you'd done. She knew what I was. She knew anyway. She was... He stopped, looked at the stone wall, looked back at her. Your mother was not the kind of person who required people to be what they weren't. She required them to be honest about what they were, which I was, with her. As honest as I've been with almost no one. The wind moved through the lighthouse below them. From somewhere outside, the sound of a car. Then another. Then, from the bottom of the stairwell, Dario's voice, flat and urgent. We have a problem. Multiple vehicles on the access road. They're not Elena's people. Nora's eyes went to the document case. Lucien picked it up. We can argue about this later, he said. You're not taking that. We need to move. His voice had changed, gone to the register of someone who has made the tactical assessment and is past the point of deliberation. Nora, we have approximately 2 minutes. She crossed the room and took the document case out of his hands. He let her. She held it against her chest. Thought about the USB drive in her jacket pocket, Elena Marsh somewhere outside, Dario at the bottom of the stairs. Thought about the photograph of her mother at 25 on this dock, laughing with a man who was going to be dead within weeks. The light was never pointing toward a place, she thought, in her mother's voice. It was pointing toward something else. She thought, 30 years. 30 years Catherine Ellery had carried this, and she had not broken under it, and she had not surrendered it, and she had not let it make her into something unrecognizable. Nora tightened her grip on the case. Below them, the sound of the outer door being forced. Lucien looked at her. I need you to trust me for the next 10 minutes, he said. After that, I'll answer every question you have for as long as you want. But right now I need you to move. If you're wrong about any of it, she said, I will make sure every piece of what's in this case destroys you along with Crow. I know, he said. I'm not wrong. She moved to the stairwell. From below, boots on stone, the specific cadence of multiple men moving fast and deliberately through a narrow space, and the sound of a voice she recognized from a phone call 40 minutes ago, giving instructions she couldn't make out but didn't need to. Vincent Crow had not sent people. Vincent Crow had come himself. And somewhere in the dark below them, Dario was either still standing or he wasn't, and Elena Marsh was either still outside or she wasn't, and the lighthouse that had been standing at the edge of this coast for 140 years was now the entirety of the world. Just the stone walls and the dark stairwell, and two people at the top of it with everything that mattered tucked against Nora Ellery's chest. She looked at Lucian. He looked back. "Go," he said. She went. She took the stairs the wrong way. Not down. Lucian had said go, and she had moved toward the stairwell, and then her body made the decision her mind hadn't finished making yet, and she went up instead of down, through the hatch, at the top of the keeper's room stairs, and out onto the lamp gallery that circled the top of the lighthouse tower. The wind hit her like a wall. The Atlantic was black and enormous 40 feet below, and in every direction, and the access road was visible from up here. She could see the vehicles, 4 of them, parked at angles that blocked the track, and she could see figures moving in the dark between the chain-link fence and the lighthouse door, and she could count them. 7. 8. She stopped counting at 8. She pressed her back against the iron railing and held the document case against her chest with both arms and breathed. The cold came off the ocean in sheets. Her jacket was inadequate for this, and she registered that fact distantly. The way you register minor physical information when your body is already running on something more urgent than comfort. Below her, inside the lighthouse, she heard voices. Crow's men reaching the bottom of the stairs. She heard Dario. One sharp sound, impact, something that meant he had not gotten clear in time. Then silence from that direction, which was worse than the sound. She looked at the lamp gallery railing, looked at the iron service ladder bolted to the outside of the tower, running from the gallery to the dock level. Old iron, heavily corroded, the kind of structure that had not been maintained in 15 years. She grabbed one rung with her free hand and pulled. It held. She grabbed a second rung. It held too. She could not climb down and hold the document case. She thought about it for approximately 1 second, the only second she had, and then she unzipped her jacket and shoved the document case inside and zipped it back up, the metal edges pressing into her ribs, and she got both hands on the ladder and went over the rail. The iron was wet, and the cold turned her hands numb within 4 rungs. She moved fast, which was the only option, foot hand, the tower wall 6 inches from her face, the wind trying to pull her sideways, the drop below her peripheral but not ignorable. 2 rungs from the bottom, her right foot slipped. Her grip held. She hung there for a half second, feet dangling, document case pressing into her sternum, the sound of the ocean very close, and then she found the rung again and stepped off onto the dock. Her knees wanted to buckle. She didn't let them. She moved along the base of the lighthouse, keeping to the wall, toward the waterside where the dock extended out over the harbor. The rock, the dark, the sound of boots somewhere around the front of the structure. She pressed flat against the stone and listened. Then a hand caught her arm. She pulled hard and spun and almost threw an elbow before she registered Elena Marsh's face 3 inches from hers. "I've got 2 agents down," Elena said, very low. "Crow had people in the tree line before we arrived. This wasn't a response. This was prepared. He knew we'd be here tonight. He's known for longer than tonight." Elena's grip on her arm tightened. "Marco." Crow wasn't using Marco to track Veskri. He was using Marco to track you. The lighthouse location, Crow has had people staged out here for 36 hours. He let you find the key. He let you come here. The cold down Nora's spine was not the wind. "It's a trap." "It's a container," Elena said. "He wanted everything in one place. The records, you, Veskari, all of it." She pulled Nora toward the dock edge where a narrow service boat was tied to the lowest cleat. Small, aluminum, the kind of vessel the old lighthouse keeper would have used for supply runs. "Get in." "Lucian is still inside." "I know." "Elena, I know." Her voice was a blade. "Get in the boat. I'll cover from here. If Veskari gets out, he gets out. If you go back in there carrying those records, Crow has everything he came for." She was right. Nora hated that she was right. She got 1 foot onto the dock ladder leading down to the boat. The lighthouse door opened. Lucian came through it moving fast, one hand pressed to his side, and Nora saw dark on his jacket that wasn't water. He cleared the door, registered them at the dock edge, and changed direction. But he was 3 seconds behind himself, moving with the particular deliberateness of someone managing pain while trying not to show it, and behind him through the door came 2 men, and behind them, unhurried, taking the kind of time that belongs to people who do not feel the need to run. Vincent Crow walked out of the lighthouse. He was exactly what he'd been in her diner 3 nights ago. Tailored coat. The weight of 30 years of untouchable authority in the way he stood. He surveyed the dock scene. Lucien ahead of him, Elena and Nora at the dock edge, and he did not reach for a weapon and did not raise his voice. "Stop," he said. One word. The 2 men flanking him both raised weapons. There were more coming around the corners of the lighthouse. The dock math was very clear and very bad. Everyone stopped. The wind came off the water. A light somewhere in the harbor threw a thin line of reflection across the surface of the Atlantic. Nora stood at the top of the dock ladder with 1 foot on it and the document case pressed against her ribs under her jacket, and she looked at Vincent Crowe across 20 feet of dock. "You have 3 federal agents at this location," Elena said. Her voice was steady. Prosecution voice. Built for rooms where every word was on record. "You are currently... 2 of your agents are restrained and unharmed," Crowe said pleasantly. "The third..." He glanced at Elena directly. "You drove here alone in a personal vehicle without notifying your office, Ms. Marsh, which means no one knows you're here, which means we're having a private conversation at the moment." Elena's expression didn't change, but her hand moved slightly toward her hip. "Don't," one of the men said. She didn't. Lucien had stopped moving. He was standing between Crowe and the dock, hand still pressed to his side, and he was looking at Crowe the way you look at something you have been moving toward for a very long time. Not with hatred. It was colder than hatred. More structural. The look of someone for whom this moment has been the organizing fact of years. "Lucien," Crowe said, with the ease of a man addressing a former employee. "You've been thorough. I'll give you that. 4 years is a long time to maintain a fiction." 30 years is longer, Lucien said. His voice was even. The pressed hand at his side was the only indication of anything else. "Yes." Crowe glanced at Nora. "The case, please." Nora didn't move. "We can have a longer conversation," Crowe said, "or a shorter one. The shorter version involves you handing over whatever your mother left in that wall, and everyone here goes home tonight." He paused. "The longer version has fewer participants at the end." "You ordered James Aldrich killed," Nora said. Something moved across Crowe's face. Not alarm. She'd had a fantasy that it would be alarm. It was more like mild recalibration, the expression of a man adjusting to a variable he'd underestimated. "That's ancient history." "My mother recorded it," Nora said. "November 14th, 1997. You, in a room with 6 other men. You ordered it. The audio is clear." Silence on the dock. The specific silence of a man doing very rapid arithmetic. Then, for the first time since she'd laid eyes on him in her diner 3 days ago, something in Vincent Crowe's face changed. The pleasantness didn't disappear. It was more like something underneath the pleasantness became briefly visible. Something that had been making decisions for 30 years and had never once been held accountable for them. "Give me the case," he said. The pleasantness was thinner now, still present, thinner. "The recording isn't in the case," Nora said. He looked at her. "I have the ledger," she said. "You can have it. It's the financial records. It documents everything, but it doesn't have you saying the words. The recording is separate. The recording is already out of your reach." She held his gaze. She was cold to her core and her hands were shaking slightly inside her pockets, and she did not let any of that be visible. "You can take the ledger and destroy it, and you'll still have a federal prosecutor who watched a 47-minute video of you ordering a murder, and you'll still have everyone she's already briefed on what she saw." Crowe turned to Elena. "You've briefed no one." "I've briefed my supervisor and 2 colleagues," Elena said, "before I drove out here. Electronic copies of what we found on the drive were uploaded to a secure server at 8:15 this evening." Her voice was perfectly level. "You drove out here to contain this, and you're approximately 3 hours too late." It was a bluff. Nora knew it was a bluff. Elena had come to the diner alone, had said explicitly that no one knew she was there, but she said it with the particular authority of someone who has spent years making juries believe things, and in the dark on the dock with the wind coming off the ocean, it landed with the weight of fact. Crowe looked at her for a long moment, then he looked at Lucien. "You brought her into this," he said. There was something in his voice now that hadn't been there before. Not anger, something flatter and more considered. "You brought in the girl and the prosecutor, and you built yourself a situation where you are standing on a dock in the cold with a bullet in your side, and you think this is winning. I think, Lucian said, that you are standing on a dock with 30 years of decisions about to come down on you, and you brought yourself here. He took his hand away from his side. The dark stain on his jacket was larger than Nora had registered from a distance, and she saw his jaw tighten at the movement. It's done, Vincent. Crow looked at him for a long moment. Something passed between them. Not warmth, not history in any human sense, but the recognition that passes between two people who have been in the same world long enough to know each other's specific weight. Then Crow said, Marcus. One of the men behind him reached into his coat. What happened next took approximately 4 seconds, and Nora experienced it in the stretched, detailed time of extreme adrenaline. Elena drawing and calling Federal Agent Freeze in the same motion. The man called Marcus swinging toward her instead of toward Lucian. The sound of the shot going wide and hitting the dock railing in a spray of corroded iron. Lucian moving. He moved faster than a man with a bullet in his side should have been able to move. 3 steps, and he was on Marcus. One controlled application of force that took the gun out of the equation. And then they were on the dock boards, and it wasn't clean. It was not the composed choreography of movies. It was 2 men and a surface, and the particular ugly efficiency of someone who has been in physical confrontations long enough to end them quickly. Elena had her weapon trained on the second man, who had made the correct assessment and put his hands up. Crow had not moved. He stood in the same position he'd been standing in, hands at his sides, and he watched Lucien get up off the dock boards with Marcus's weapon in his hand and blood soaking through the left side of his jacket in a way that was moving past managed into urgent. And Crow's expression was the expression of a man watching a calculation he'd made a long time ago prove incorrect in real time. Nora came off the dock ladder. She crossed the dock and stopped 6 feet from Vincent Crow. She unzipped her jacket and took out the document case and held it in both hands. My mother spent 30 years carrying this, she said. 30 years of deadbolts and changed names and working double shifts in a diner in a city she never quite let herself belong to because she was waiting for the right moment. And she ran out of time. Her voice was steady. She had not planned what to say, and she was not performing it. You took 30 years from her. You took her name, her history, her ability to just... She stopped. She couldn't even tell me the truth about who she was. Because of you. Crow looked at the case. You wanted this, she said. Here. She opened her hands. The case hit the dock. Not thrown. Placed precisely at the edge of the dock, balanced on the lip. Crow looked at it. If you take it, Nora said, you still have the recording, the prosecutor, and a federal case that's been built for 4 years. You get the ledger and you still lose everything. She paused. Or you're a man who's smart enough to know when the arithmetic has changed. Somewhere behind Crow, the sound of additional vehicles on the access road. Not careful. Fast. The sound of law enforcement driving without concern for discretion. Elena had made at least one call on the way here, and whatever she'd said was now arriving. Crow heard it. His eyes moved to the road. Back to Nora. Back to the document case balanced on the dock edge. His expression settled into something that was neither defeat nor acceptance. Something older and more complicated. The expression of a man who has spent 30 years making decisions from a position of absolute control and has arrived, at last, at a position with no good options. He reached for the case, and Lucian said, Don't. He said it quietly. From 6 feet away, bleeding through his jacket, weapon at his side not raised, just present. He said it the way he said most things, without drama, without performance, with the flat certainty of someone who means what he says and has learned over 20 years that people who mean what they say don't need to ornament it. Crow's hand stopped. It's finished, Lucian said. Let it be finished. The vehicles came through the fence, lights across the dock, voices calling federal positions. The dock suddenly full of the purposeful movement of people who had been deployed with specific instructions and were following them. Vincent Crow stood at light, with his hand 6 inches from a document case on the edge of a dock, and the Atlantic behind him, and 30 years arriving at once, and he did not reach for the case. He straightened. He put his hands up. Nora picked up the case from the dock edge before anyone else could reach it. She held it. She watched Elena Marsh move forward with handcuffs and the particular controlled expression of someone who has waited 4 years for this moment and is not going to let the weight of it show. She watched Vincent Crow's hands go behind his back. She watched Lucien Viscari, who had moved himself to the dock railing and was leaning against it with both hands and his head slightly down, managing something. And she crossed the dock to him, and he looked up when she got close, and his face was gray under the dock lights. "How bad?" she said. "Manageable." "That's not an answer." "Through and through," he said. "I've had worse." "That's also not an answer." She got her shoulder under his arm without asking. He didn't resist. "There are federal agents and presumably eventually paramedics on this dock. You're going to talk to both of them." "I'm going to have a difficult conversation with Elena Marsh," he said, with something that might, under different circumstances, have been dry humor. "Yes," Nora said. "You are. And then you're going to tell me everything you decided not to tell me over the last 24 hours, in the correct order, with no omissions." His weight shifted against her shoulder. He was heavier than she'd expected, not in terms of physical mass, but in terms of what it meant to be the thing holding him up. She registered that without letting it distract her. "Everything," she said. "Everything," he agreed. Across the dock, Elena Marsh was speaking quietly into her phone, her other hand on Crow's arm, the three of them moving toward the vehicles in the way of people whose next months were going to be defined by courtrooms and depositions and the long, grinding work of turning a night on a dock into a legal outcome that would hold. The lights from the response vehicles swept across the water. The lighthouse stood behind all of them, dark now, the lamp room empty, the stone wall with its hollow space open to whatever cold air moved through it. Nora Ellery stood on the dock her mother had stood on 30 years ago, holding a document case that had been waiting in a wall for almost as long as she'd been alive, with a man who owed a debt to the dead leaning on her shoulder and the Atlantic at her back, and everything still to be resolved, the charges, the testimony, the legal architecture of bringing down something that had been built over decades, still ahead. But Crow's hands were behind his back, and the case was in her hands. And for the first time in 3 days, the arithmetic was pointing in a direction she could live with. The wind came off the water and the dock lights held, and somewhere in the lighthouse behind her, in a 19th century granite wall, the hollow where her mother's secret had lived for 30 years stood open to the night air at last, empty and clean and done. Nora tightened her grip on the case. She looked at the lights on the water. She breathed. The paramedics came in the second wave. Nora stood on the dock and watched them work on Lucien with the particular detachment of someone who has used up their available adrenaline and is now operating on something quieter and less reliable. He sat on the dock boards with his back against the railing and his jacket open, and he did not make a sound while they worked, which she found both reassuring and characteristic. One of the paramedics said something about the hospital, and he said something back that she couldn't hear, and the paramedic's expression said the argument was not going his way. Elena Marsh appeared at Nora's shoulder. "He needs surgery." "I know." "He's arguing about it." "I know that too." Elena was quiet for a moment. Around them, the dock had become a procedural landscape. Federal agents moving in patterns, vehicles repositioned, Crow's men being processed with the efficient impersonality of a system that had been waiting a long time to do exactly this. Crow himself was in the back of a vehicle, and Nora had not looked at him since they'd put his hands behind his back, and she didn't look now. "The 2 agents he had in the tree line," Elena said. "They're both okay. Restrained, not hurt." "And Dario?" A pause. "Concussion. Possible broken cheekbone. He's conscious and extremely irritated about it, which the paramedics say is a good sign." Nora exhaled, something she'd been holding since the stairwell let go fractionally. "The recording," she said. "The video file. Still on the drive. Still in my possession." Elena reached into her coat and held it out. The small black USB drive, the size of a thumbnail, the weight of 30 years. "I made copies before I came to the diner. That part wasn't a bluff. My supervisor has the file. My office's secure server has the file." She paused. "Your mother was thorough. The audio is clear enough for evidentiary use. The visual identification of Crow is unambiguous." She turned the drive over in her fingers before placing it back in her pocket. "She built this to last." "She built everything to last," Nora said. "That was the thing about her. She never did anything halfway." She watched the paramedics help Lucien to his feet, and she watched him resist the stretcher, and she watched him lose that argument too. "She just did some of it secretly." Elena looked at her sideways. "Are you all right?" "No," Nora said. but I'm standing up, which is the part that matters right now. The hospital was 40 minutes from the coast, and Nora rode in the ambulance not because anyone officially sanctioned it, but because she got in and nobody stopped her, and the paramedic in back apparently decided that the woman covered in dock grime with a document case zip-tied to her wrist by her own belt was not a problem he was equipped to address at this time. Lucien was on a gurney and an IV was running, and his color was bad, but his eyes were open and tracking, and when she sat down on the narrow bench across from him, he looked at her with the specific expression of someone who has arrived, through considerable difficulty, at a situation they are not entirely unhappy about, despite the immediate circumstances. "You got in the ambulance," he said. "I did." "I told you to get in the boat." "You told me to go," she said. "I went up." It was a different interpretation. His jaw tightened. She thought it was disagreement, and then she realized the paramedic was doing something to his side that required management, and the tightening was not about her. He breathed through it, carefully. In the way of a man who has had occasion to breathe carefully through physical pain before and has developed a specific technique. "The case," he said, when he could. "Still with me." Elena has copies of everything. The case is the original ledger. I'll transfer it to her formally, with documentation, at a time when I'm not in an ambulance and you're not bleeding. She looked at him. "There are things we need to talk about." "I know." "Not right now." "I know that too." The ambulance moved through the dark coast road, and the overhead light was too bright, and the equipment made small sounds, and Nora sat on the bench and held the document case in her lap, and thought about her mother. Not in the way she'd been thinking about her for the last 3 days. As a mystery to be solved, a past to be uncovered, a set of choices whose consequences had landed on Nora like structural debris. She thought about her mother the way she sometimes had in the last years, when Catherine was still healthy, sitting across from her at a diner table, watching her hands around a coffee cup, thinking there was something deliberate about the way her mother occupied space, as if she was always aware of how much room she was taking up and was being careful about it. She understood that differently now. When you have spent years being aware that the space you occupy could become visible to the wrong person, you learn to hold yourself carefully. You learn to take up exactly as much room as you need and no more. You learn to make yourself the kind of still that doesn't attract attention. Catherine Ellery had been in hiding her entire adult life. She had been in hiding while raising a child, while working double shifts, while checking locks and moving through a world she could never fully inhabit, because part of her was always listening for the sound of it catching up. And she had done it. She had lasted long enough. She had passed what she carried to the right hands. She had just not been there to see it land. Nora pressed her palm flat against the document case. "I know, Mom," she thought. "I know you couldn't tell me. I know why." She didn't say it out loud, but she thought it, clearly and completely, and let it settle into the place where the grief had been sitting like a stone since the parking lot, and the USB drive, and the note in her mother's shaking handwriting. The surgery took 3 hours and 40 minutes. Nora sat in a waiting room that smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee and worked through the document case with Elena Marsh, who had arrived at the hospital an hour after the ambulance, with 2 colleagues and a chain of custody protocol, and the particular focused energy of someone who has been waiting 4 years for an evening exactly like this one. The ledger was everything her mother had said it was. 11 years of forensic accounting by one of the sharpest financial minds Elena's team had encountered, organized, cross-referenced, annotated in a small, neat hand that Nora recognized immediately. Account numbers, dates, names. The architecture of 30 years of crime laid out with the precision of someone who understood that this document would one day need to stand in a courtroom and withstand everything Crow's defense team could throw at it. Catherine Ellery, had built it to survive exactly that. She annotated the shell corporation structures, Elena said, turning a page with gloved hands. She's mapped the ownership chains 3 levels deep for every entity. This would have taken... She stopped. This would have taken months. She did this while she was still inside. She was preparing to leave, Nora said. She was building the exit while she was still there. And she took the recording the same night she took this. Nora nodded. She knew it wasn't enough to document the money. She needed something that put Crow personally at the top of it, something that couldn't be attributed to underlings or plausible deniability. She looked at the page Elena was holding. She was very thorough. She was extraordinary, Elena said quietly. It came out without professional distance. Just the plain fact of it, stated plainly. She caught herself and straightened slightly. The annotated structures alone will cut 6 months off the prosecution timeline. They worked until 2 in the morning when the surgeon came out and said the bullet had done what through-and-through bullets do when they avoid arteries and major organs, which was create a significant mess that was now cleaned up and closed, and that the patient would be monitored overnight and could expect a recovery period of several weeks, and should under no circumstances do anything strenuous in the near term, a recommendation that Elena and Nora received with the expressions of 2 people who had already identified several strenuous conversations in the immediate future. They let Nora see him for 10 minutes. He was pale and the room was quiet, and he looked, for the first time since she'd met him, like a man who was tired. Not the vigilant tiredness of someone running an operation, the deeper kind. The kind that comes when the thing you've been braced against for years finally arrives, and you discover that the bracing itself was taking more out of you than you knew. She sat in the chair beside the bed. "Marco," she said. "In federal custody as of an hour ago," he said. His voice was rougher than usual. Elena moved fast. "His family?" He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprised that she'd asked, but something that registered the asking. "Safe. She's not going after his wife. The kids aren't touched." A pause. "She's not vindictive. That's one of the things I—" He stopped. "One of the things you respect about her?" Nora said. "Yes." She looked at the window. The hospital room faced a parking structure, and there was nothing to see, but she looked anyway. "You need to give her everything. The financial operation, the false flag, with Crow's accounts, all of it, whatever you held back." She turned back to him. "She's building something that has to hold for decades. She needs to know where every crack is." "I know. I'm not asking whether you plan to. I'm telling you it's not optional." His mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something that acknowledged the difference between how she'd spoken to him at the beginning of this and how she was speaking to him now, and seemed to find the difference, if not welcome exactly, then fitting. "Understood. Good. And the organization," she said. "What happens to it?" He was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about that for longer than you might expect." "What did you think?" "That there are people in it who are there because they had choices and made bad ones," he said. "And people who are there because they never had choices at all. And those are different situations." He shifted slightly and his jaw tightened at the movement. "The legitimate operations, the businesses, the property holdings, the financial structures that are actually clean, I can document and transfer. There are people in those structures who've been running legitimate work for years. They don't disappear. And the rest?" "The rest," he said, "I dismantle, deliberately, piece by piece." He looked at the ceiling. "I have been—" He stopped. Started again, more carefully. "I have been telling myself for 20 years that I was different from Vincent Crow, that the line I kept made me something other than what I was. That's a useful story when you need to sleep." A pause. "It's not entirely false, but it's not entirely true either." Nora sat with that. "What's true," he said, "is that I built something that hurt people. Not the ones I told myself it didn't reach. It reached further than that. It always does." He looked at her. "I can't undo it, but I can stop adding to it." She thought about her mother, about the shape of a life built in the shadow of a decision made at 24, about the particular courage it took to carry something for 30 years and not let it make you smaller than you were. "My mother trusted you," she said. "Yes. I'm not her." "I know. My trust is going to take longer and it's going to require more." She held his gaze. "Not because of what you've done, because of who I am. I don't give it easily and I don't give it all at once, and I don't give it because someone I loved gave it before me." He looked at her with something that was neither agreement nor argument, something more like recognition, the look of a man who has spent years being given things conditionally and has learned to identify the difference between conditions and what lay underneath them. "That's fair," he said. "I know it is," she said. "I'm not asking for your assessment of its fairness." The monitor beside the bed made its small, regular sound. Outside in the hallway, the hospital went about its nighttime business. The squeak of a cart, a voice at a nursing station, the measured world of people whose job it was to keep things from getting worse. She stood up. "Sleep," she said. "Elena will be here in the morning. Be honest with her." She left before he could answer. The weeks that followed were nothing like the nights that preceded them, which was both a relief and its own kind of difficulty. The difficulty was the scale of the procedural reality. The depositions, the evidence transfers, the formal interviews with Elena's office, and two separate federal agencies who had interests in the Crow Collective's unraveling. Nora sat in rooms with lawyers she hadn't known she'd need, and answered questions about events she was still processing, and she did it with the same precision her mother had brought to the ledger, clearly, completely, with nothing omitted. She also, 3 weeks after the doc, found the photograph in her coat pocket. Her mother at 25, standing on the lighthouse dock with James Aldrich, laughing at something off camera. She sat at her kitchen table for a long time looking at it. Her mother had been 25 in that photograph, younger than Nora was now. She had already been inside the Crow Collective for a year. She had already begun to understand what she was working for and to build, quietly and methodically, the way out. She had looked like that, open, laughing, lit up, while she was already carrying what she carried. Nora put the photograph on her kitchen windowsill. She looked at it every morning when she made coffee, and she let herself think about the woman in it, and she let the grief come in the controlled amounts that were what she had available, and she did not hurry it. The first hearing in the Crow case was 43 days after the lighthouse. Vincent Crow appeared in federal court in a suit that still somehow looked tailored, which Elena told Nora afterward she had expected, and which the jury pool, when selected, would probably notice. The charges were substantial: 3 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, including the documented order on James Aldrich; 41 counts related to money laundering, racketeering, and organized criminal enterprise; 6 additional counts arising from the operation that had claimed the lives of 2 people whose names had appeared in the ledger as cooperating witnesses who had not survived to cooperate. He entered a plea of not guilty on all counts. Elena Marsh, when Nora called her that evening, sounded like a person who had been waiting for an opponent to show up and was now entirely focused on the game ahead. "Good," she said, when Nora asked how she felt about the not guilty plea. "I want to prove it in court. I want all of it on the record." "How long?" "Trial date is set for 14 months out, could move up, could extend." She paused. "The video recording alone is going to be—" She didn't finish. "Your mother built a watertight case. It's going to hold." Nora thanked her and hung up and sat at her kitchen table in the apartment she'd moved into 6 weeks ago, larger than her old place, with a window that didn't leak, a small second bedroom she'd set up as a study. She'd enrolled in the accelerated nursing certification program. Classes started in 3 weeks. She had not returned to Rosie's Diner. Deb was running it with the owner's blessing, which was an arrangement that seemed to be working out, and Nora had gone by once to collect the rest of her things and had stood in the space for a moment with the broken door frame repaired and everything else exactly as it had been. The counter, the booths, the coffee station. And had felt, not nothing, but the specific sensation of a place that had been the whole of something becoming a part of something larger. She'd taken her spare apron off the hook in the back and thrown it in the donation bin on her way out. She didn't need it anymore. Lucian Vescary's cooperation agreement with Elena Marsh's office took 11 days to negotiate and produced a document that, Elena told her, was among the more comprehensive she had handled, both in terms of what he provided and in terms of how completely he provided it. The false flag financial operation, fully disclosed. The full architecture of his organization, including the legitimate structures and the ones that weren't. The names of every person he'd protected, every arrangement he'd made, every line of the 20-year operation that had run parallel to and sometimes in direct tension with Elena's legal one. He also provided, at his own initiative, information that resulted in the arrest and indictment of 3 state officials and 1 federal administrator whose connections to the Crow Collective had not previously been documented. He was not offered immunity. He negotiated reduced exposure on specific charges in exchange for complete cooperation, which was not the same thing, and he did not pretend otherwise. Nora found this out from Elena, not from Lucian. She found out directly from Lucian that he had sold the property holding company, the 2 waterfront warehouses in Gloucester, and the marine supply business, and had used the proceeds to establish a fund distributed through 3 legal aid organizations in cities where his operation had historically generated the most damage. She found this out in a phone call that was their first real conversation since the hospital, which took place 6 weeks after the dock and which she initiated. "Why didn't you tell me yourself?" she said. "You said you'd need time," he said. "I was giving you time." "I said my trust would take longer. I didn't say I needed to be kept uninformed." A pause on his end, long enough to mean something. "You're right," he said. He stopped. "I've spent a long time managing what information reaches which person. It's a habit I'm finding harder to break than I expected." "I know," she said. "Break it anyway." Another pause. "The lighthouse property," he said. "The county litigation. When Crow's assets were frozen, his company withdrew its contest. The lighthouse goes to the County Historic Trust. They're going to restore it." He paused. "There's a keeper's record from 1887 in the archive. The lighthouse keeper's name was Eleanor Marsh." Nora was quiet for a moment. "Elena doesn't know that yet," Lucian said. "Tell her yourself," Nora said. "I will," he said. And she believed him. Waitress. She went back to the lighthouse once before the restoration work began. November, 5 months after the dock. The access road was still gravel, still marked with the county litigation notices, now supplemented with a historic trust placard that looked optimistic about what was coming. She parked where Elena had parked and walked to the lighthouse in the early morning light. The dock was ordinary in daylight. Weathered boards, salt-eaten iron cleats, the harbor flat and gray and working. She could see 2 fishing boats coming in from the overnight run, moving slowly, the way boats move when they are carrying weight. She stood on the dock and looked at the lighthouse. The keeper's room windows were dark. The door she had pushed through in the dark was closed and latched. The iron service ladder on the exterior was exactly as corroded as it had been. She looked at it and thought about going over that rail in the dark with the wind and the case under her jacket and her hands going numb on cold iron, and she thought about what it had felt like to hit the dock at the bottom, and she thought about how at no point during any of that had she thought, "I cannot do this." She had not thought that at any point in the last 5 months. She had thought, "This is hard and this is frightening, and I don't know if I'm making the right choices, but not I cannot." She thought about her mother at 25 on this dock. She thought about what it costs to carry something for 30 years and not let it break you, and what it costs differently to carry it and also raise a child in the middle of it, trying to give that child something whole and clean while you yourself are neither. Catherine Ellery had not been perfect. She had kept secrets that should not have been kept. She had made her daughter grow up in a life that was missing whole rooms, whole people, whole histories, whole explanations that would have made the silences less lonely. She had been a woman operating under impossible conditions and doing her imperfect best within them, and some of that imperfect best had landed hard on the person she loved most. Nora held that. She let it be true, both the love and the cost of it, both the courage of what her mother had done and the loneliness of what her mother had created around them both. She let those things exist without canceling each other out, because they didn't cancel each other out, because that was not how people worked, and her mother had been a person, fully and imperfectly, which was the most Nora had ever wanted for her, and the thing she was only now, standing on this dock, able to give her. The lighthouse beam was not running, had not run for 15 years, would not run again until the restoration was complete. But the tower was still there, and the lamp room at the top of it still faced the ocean, and the direction it pointed had not changed. She took the photograph out of her jacket pocket. Her mother at 25. James Aldrich laughing, the handwriting on the back. The light remembers. She stood with it in the cold morning air for a long time. Then she put it back in her pocket, next to her heart, where it had been all morning. The last thing she did before she left the dock was pull out her phone and make a call she'd been making every other week for 4 months, to the number the hospital's social work team had given her the night she'd sat in the waiting room, a trauma counselor who worked with people who had been, as the referral form had put it, exposed to acute danger and significant loss, which was the bureaucratic language for what had happened to her and which she had at first found inadequate and had since come to understand was just the formal container for something that didn't fit into formal containers. Dr. Sandra Vo picked up on the second ring. "I'm at the lighthouse," Nora said. "I came to look at it in daylight." "And?" "It's smaller than I expected. Things always are, when you see them in normal light." "How do you feel?" Nora looked at the water, at the boats moving slowly through the gray harbor, at the sky above the lighthouse, which was doing what November sky does, heavy and low and full of something that hadn't decided yet whether it was rain. Not finished, she said, but moving. That's good, Dr. Vu said. That's what moving looks like. Nora breathed in, salt and cold, and the particular clean smell of moving water. I start clinicals next week, she said, at St. Anne's Trauma Unit. I know, you mentioned it last week. I know I mentioned it. I'm mentioning it again because I keep being surprised that I'm not afraid of it. Why would you be afraid? Because it's what my mother wanted for herself and never got to do. And I thought carrying that would make it… She paused, waited, the wrong kind. And instead, she looked at the lighthouse one last time, the stone, the iron, the empty lamp room facing the ocean, patient and purposeless for 15 years, waiting for someone to restore the thing it had been built to do. Instead, it feels like the right kind, she said. She stayed on the dock another few minutes after she hung up. She did not try to make the moment into more than it was. She did not say anything to her mother, or to the lighthouse, or to the harbor. She just stood on the dock in the November cold and let the moving water be what it was, and let the morning be what it was, and let herself be what she was, a woman who had walked through something that should have been too large for her and had found, on the other side of it, that the size of what you survive changes the size of what you can hold. Then she zipped her jacket. She turned away from the water. She walked back down the dock toward the access road, her footsteps steady and even on the weathered boards, and she did not look back. The lighthouse stood behind her, stone and iron and 30 years of buried truth, empty now of everything it had been holding, ready, at last, to be something else.